Hello and welcome to the RCSI MyHealth Series, supported by Fleming Medical. I'm Professor Oran Kennedy, and today we're going to discuss nutrition for healthy growth and development. The series explores a wide range of areas in health and well-being and brings together some of the leading experts in healthcare in these fields with the goal of empowering people with the knowledge to make informed decisions about their own health and well-being. Today I am joined by Dr. Claire Timon, lecturer in the School of Population Health RCSI, and Dr. Michael Riordan, Clinical Senior Lecturer in RCSI and Consultant in Nephrology, Children's Health Ireland. Welcome to the RCSI MyHealth Series. As part of the discussion today, we'll address some of the key concerns and worries that parents have around the topic of child nutrition and provide some information and practical advice to parents and caregivers to support the healthy growth and development in children and young people. So Claire and Michael, my first question is to the both of you. Is nutrition a source of worry for parents, and what do they worry about?
Yeah, so we know that parents have plenty of concerns about their children's health and well-being, and the research would show us that, in line with the topic today, that some of the key priorities are healthy nutrition and being physically active, obesity, and mental health issues as well. So being a parent is not easy, and there's a lot of kind of issues to weigh up. It can be like a juggling act in terms of priorities and concerns. And we often, hear questions like, are my children eating enough fruit and vegetables? Are they active enough? Are they happy? If there's a medical condition there, parents are concerned about whether they're on top of the medical condition and whether they're supporting their child appropriately. That's leaving aside any other issues outside of health, like financial worries and things like that. So there's a lot for parents to think about relative to their child's health. So focusing on the topic today, which is nutrition, where are we at with Ireland? So firstly, we'd look at from an obesity perspective, and considering the childhood obesity rates, although they are high, recent data would show us that there is stabilisation in those rates. So that's a really positive finding, and some data would even suggest that those rates may fall. Now, that's not saying that we're out of the woods there yet, like the rates are still high. So recent data suggesting that childhood obesity rates are 1 in 5 children are either overweight or obese. So there is certainly progress to be made, but there has been improvement in recent years. And then from a dietary perspective, so when we're trying to look at the dietary intakes of our child and adolescent population, a really good place to look is the national nutrition surveys that we conduct in Ireland to kind of give us an idea of where we're at. These surveys are conducted by the Irish University Nutrition Alliance, and these are really detailed surveys that are coordinated every so often in different sections of the population. So the most recent data that we have from both child and teen surveys are roughly from between 2018 to 2020 is the most recent data collection that we have there. And if we compare the results from there to the prior surveys, we can see that there have been changes. One of the most notable ones being that there's been a big decrease in sugar sweetened beverage consumption, so fizzy drinks, and that's been replaced with water intake, which is a really kind of positive finding. There's also been a slight increase in fruit intake, and also an increase in wholemeal and brown bread consumption as well. So we're seeing nice improvements in dietary fibre and things like that. Some of the other results would show us that there is still a bit of work to do when we think about things like saturated fat, sugar, and salt intakes are above recommended at the moment. So there is positives, but there's certainly room for improvements there as well.
Yeah. And over to you, Michael. Would you see similar things, or what are the worries that parents have when they come in to see you?
I suppose it is positive that parents are concerned about this, and I think it's positive that children are concerned about it as well. And I think there's a mix of probably necessary and unnecessary worries in the world, and the difficulty is sometimes picking those out. I mean, the sort of classic thing that we would see is parents of young children who are very worried that their children aren't growing and are underweight, and that's very uncommon. And we do see children who are underweight in the context of having often an illness that we are well aware of, but it is very unusual for healthy children to be underweight.
What might an example of those illnesses be?
Children with kidney disease, children with some forms of diabetes, cystic fibrosis, gastroenterology diseases, those children are often underweight despite actually achieving an adequate calorie intake. But often we know that those children have those diseases. It would be a very unusual presentation of illness in a child to not be gaining weight without any other signs of illness. Whereas a lot of parents would have a concern that their baby wasn't as heavy as their baby might be, or their baby wasn't as long as their baby might, And so that puts a lot of pressure on parents, and it can be difficult. I do think it is a source of worry, but it's possibly, most of the time, that worry may not necessarily need to be as acute as it is. And then on the flip side, I think there's a lot of worry caused to families and to older children in relation to being overweight. And I think that's, again, I think there's an awful lot of misery coming out in relation to that. And it's possibly not as easy to talk about or not as acknowledged. And so we would address, in clinic, for example, we'd address weight issues often with kids and families. I think in general people are often very grateful that it's being addressed, but it is a very emotive subject, and you have to be really careful not to cause an awful lot of grief.
Sure. And so to follow on from that, then, what's good, do you think, in the present day? What's good, and what are people getting right in terms of children's and teenagers' nutritional intake at the moment?
I think Claire's probably a bigger expert on this than me, but the one thing I would say is we have to acknowledge that all of our children are bigger than they ever were. If you go to Glendalough and walk through the doors, we're taller, we're better nourished. The consequence of being better nourished is probably to be, the risk of overweight, but actually stronger bones, better teeth, all of those aspects of nutrition are better. So, the consequence of it all is the risk of overdoing it, but actually malnutrition, as we saw in the 17th, 18th and the beginnings of the 19th century, is significantly less than it was. One of the things that I think we're both interested in is this concept that, you can be a healthy weight, but can be malnourished, so it's possibly a little bit more complicated. But overall, the nutritional standards, our diet is a better diet. It's more varied. There's a lot more to it, I think is reasonable to say.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think that point as well about, presenting a normal weight, or in some cases, potentially even overweight, but potentially malnourished, is an interesting point. And we've kind of talked about this in preparation for today. The concept that in context of food poverty issues as well, and cost of living crisis as well, that an energy dense diet doesn't necessarily mean, a wide variety of micronutrients that are really important for growth and development as well. So I think that's really important to think about in today's kind of current climate. In terms of what's good, if we think about the food pyramid, which is a kind of a health promotion tool of how many portions and servings of different types of food groups we should be achieving, just to take some of the kind of dietary survey results into context of health promotion. If we look at some of the food groups, so fruit and vegetables, as I mentioned, there has been a slight increase in fruit intake, but overall fruit and veg intake is still lower than what's recommended. So our children and adolescents are currently at about 3 servings a day. The recommended guidelines is between 5 and 7. So there was a slight improvement, but there's still plenty of work to do as well. And when we think of the importance of that food group in terms of providing really important micronutrients like vitamin C, folate, great source of dietary fibre as well, which is really important for, gastrointestinal health and digestive health and things like that as well. As we progress up then, and we look at the kind of, I suppose, the more energy dense section, so the whole grains and cereals, there's certainly adequate intake there, and we're seeing some wholemeal and brown sources being kind of chosen compared to maybe white alternatives in the past. So that's certainly an improvement, and dietary fibre intakes of our younger population are just about meeting recommendations now, which is a great improvement as well. When we get to the dairy section, the recommendations are about 3 portions, but we've actually seen a decline in dairy consumption, particularly milk consumption, with the current data that we have to the last survey as well. So that's quite interesting, like dairy being a really important source, particularly in an Irish context as well, when we think of what nutrients those food groups are providing, key source of protein and calcium as well, obviously for, you know, bones and health and teeth development. And then as we progress up through the rest of the shelves in the food pyramid, the top shelf is what we would say is every so often we think of things like treats there, sugar sweetened beverages, and the data is actually showing us that about 18% of our children's and adolescents' calories are coming from this food group. So that's a key area for, you know, intervention there. And Safe Food have been doing fantastic work with their START campaign there to try and reduce treats and not have them as often, and certain strategies to help parents cope with that as well. But finishing on a kind of positive, as I mentioned before, the sugar sweetened beverage, and that's largely down to healthy eating policies in schools that would have banned sugar sweetened beverages as part of lunches. So we've seen a huge a decrease in free sugars in children's diets because water is replacing sugar sweetened beverages now. So that's a really positive point to come out of the surveys.
Yeah, it's great. It's really interesting. And Claire, you mentioned earlier that the survey findings indicated higher intakes of saturated fat, free sugars and salt. Michael, when we talk about salt intake, are there guidelines for children of different ages in relation to the healthy intake of salt? And what's the impact on the body if there's too much salt?
Yeah, I mean, it is very interesting. There are very specific guidelines in terms of, you know, the grams of salt that would be recommended for different ages of children, but part of the problem is that the vast majority of salt that you get in your diet and the children get in their diet is from processed food where it's really sort of hidden salt, and it's very hard to quantify it or to really work out what that gram amount is. And so I think it's interesting that it is such a worry to parents sometimes about salt. There's lots of fights over salt, you know, in many households. I'm not going to name them specifically, but the reality, I think, is it's to do with building good habits for the future. And I think probably the easiest advice is to say that you shouldn't encourage children to add salt to food that you serve at the table. That you can use salt in cooking if it's necessary for the cooking to taste nice, but you should try and moderate the amount of salt you put into cooked foods. You should recognise that children will be getting plenty of salt from processed foods, and that the habit of sprinkling salt on food is something that should be discouraged, not really in terms of its consequence for children, but in terms of its consequence as a habit for adulthood, and what effect it may have on things like blood pressure in later life. So I'm not sure that it's so much to do with the risk in childhood, but it's definitely a habit that would be bad in the future.
Okay, yeah, that's fascinating. And you see a lot of children with parents in your clinic, and as well as what they do wrong and all of that. What questions do they typically have for you?
There's some interesting things that come up a lot at the moment, and I suppose the one of the things we get asked about, which is clearly a source of conflict within the home, is energy drinks. And these drinks are sort of mixtures of a very high sugar content, and also often containing things like caffeine. They are they're not good for children. They're not in any way ideal. They're basically giving a sugar rush and a caffeine rush. They're fine if you are a sort of, you know, fighter pilot in a war who needs to wake themselves up, but they're not really something that you should be drinking for breakfast as a primary school child. They're expensive, and they can lead to issues with blood pressure and hyperactivity and things like that. So we really, you know, they should be discouraged, and I think they're a bad habit for kids. We get asked about, there's a difference between energy drinks and the sort of the sort of the hydration drinks, exactly, the sort of sports drinks. And again, I think you need to be really careful about the concept that the sports drinks that are very sugary, there is some role in your recovery from very high-end athletic pursuit that those might be of some benefit to you. I met somebody in the clinic recently who had been given the advice by their rugby coach when they were doing quite serious level junior rugby. They'd said the best sports drink was Diorolite. They're absolutely right. You know, you don't need a fancy bottle, lots of sugar, and a big marketing campaign. It's if you really want to recover from sporting activity to do with high intensity sweating, then Diorolites, you know, but possibly not as sexy as some of the other things that might be available.
Yeah. Just to add to that, anecdotally, we're hearing a lot about from teachers that are experiencing children in primary and secondary school that are drinking these energy drinks before school, and they're coming in to school in a very kind of hyper state as well. And when we think of the content, some of these drinks have, you know, 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams of caffeine, and the current recommendations are that really these types of caffeinated beverages shouldn't be consumed by anyone under the age of 16 for many reasons. And independent kind of research to the surveys done by Safe Food would suggest that about 60 to 70% of our adolescent population are drinking these drinks, and also about 20% of our child population are drinking these as well. So it's certainly an area that kind of warrants a bit more investigation, I think.
The other one that we get asked a lot about is sort of protein supplementation, protein powders, protein bars. And again, it's really interesting. There's a role for protein supplementation in some disease states. You know, there are some people who do need an additional protein fix, or an additional protein component to their diet that they're not going to be able to get easily from another source. But the vast majority of us have more than adequate protein. We're not using that protein to build our bodies. What we're doing is just metabolizing that protein into energy, and if we don't use that energy, we're turning it into fat. So it's basically just another form of calorie intake, and it's not particularly useful to us. So the protein powders, probably a lot of people will be supplementing protein when they don't really need the protein. If you think about the cost of a giant container of protein powder, it's amazing compared with the cost of just getting that protein from normal food, chicken breast, you know, some other source of protein. And then the protein powders also, it's not entirely clear what's in them. There are other things in them. There are sweeteners, there are flavorings, there are goodness knows what in some of them. There's this creatine supplement, which basically is a muscle breakdown waste product with very little evidence to show that it actually has a nutritional benefit at all. So you've got a sort of, you know, you're buying something expensive for something you don't really need, when actually if you were to just focus on a really healthy diet, spend less money, and you'd get all of the other things that are just not in those powders.
And I was just going to feed into that point there from the surveys, going back to the surveys again, they would show us that protein intake is not an issue for our child and adolescent population, that they're achieving more through their diet than, you know, it's completely adequate. So there is no need for this supplementation with these protein bars and powders, and particularly at those ages. But yet they're, you know, a lot of them are marketed and are being consumed by our children and adolescents. So, yeah.
I think the last one that we get asked a lot about is vitamin supplements, and it's difficult to give a blanket view, because that probably is, to an extent, the people that I see, that's a health question, and it's specific to them. By and large, children eating a healthy diet probably don't need a specific supplement as such. There is evidence to suggest that, for example, vitamin D levels in the population are not what they should be in the paediatric population, the child population. So that there may be a role for some supplements in that context. But if you're eating a very healthy, well-balanced, nutritionally appropriate diet, you could well not be somebody who needs those sorts of supplements at all. So there's plenty of children who just probably don't need them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess the reason they want them, certainly the ones in my house, oftentimes is because of influence from social media or from advertising. So what do you think the role is for that, Claire?
I think research will show us that there's certainly a kind of conclusive link between what we might call junk food, or the marketing of unhealthy foods, and childhood obesity. So exposure to excessive junk food advertisements has been shown actually in research in the UK to actually add to approximately 18,000 extra calories in children's intake every year. And data would suggest again that children are exposed to approximately 3 adverts relating to junk food or unhealthy food every 10 minutes. So there's huge potential there for children to see these adverts and to be influenced by them as well.
It all sounds a little bit worrying, Claire. Is there any positive news on that front to go with that?
Yeah, so not to be like totally negative about the role of kind of digital media there. Like there's preliminary evidence, I would say, to suggest that actually healthy eating behaviours can be influenced via social media and things like that. Evidence to suggest that children who see their peers online eating well and influencers eating well has been shown to increase vegetable intake there. So there is huge potential there for digital. My research involves using digital technologies to improve lifestyle behaviours in an adult population, and we're seeing some really promising results there. So I suppose it really comes down to policy and regulation of these online adverts to try and use media in a positive way and kind of outweigh the negatives, I suppose.
And is there anybody else advocating for that kind of thing that can kind of help you with your research?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Irish Heart Foundation are huge advocates in this area. They actually have a campaign called Stop Targeting Kids, and they're really trying to, I suppose, outright ban online advertising of junk food, as they kind of term it, high foods that are high in salt, fat and sugar. That these are banned, online advertisement of these are banned, that TV advertisements for these types of foods, there's currently a ban in place, I think, till 6 p.m, but they're trying to extend that to 9 p.m, obviously, you know, taking into account that children are watching TV beyond, 6 p.m. in the evening. And lastly, they're trying to advocate for, banning advertising on any state-owned products like, bus shelters and things like that, any foods of that type of nature as well.
And Michael, would you have a similar view on that? Or
I think it's really good if we can start to link in people in the media in a positive way to say, well, look, this is what they do for their diets. They're not eating rubbish. They're eating good food in quantity in order to be able to achieve what they've achieved. I think the other thing that's a big influence is parents' influence on other parents. And I think the other thing is that we're very focused on making children challenge the information they receive. We live in a time where information from all sources is challenged. It's really important to encourage children to challenge nutritional information that they appear to be getting, so that they think about, well, that person is eating that thing and looks like that. Does that make actually any sense at all? To just say, is there any logic to what you're seeing in this particular video or influencer or poster?
You've kind of covered it now. You covered my next question, but again, for both of you, would there be any specific practical tools or advice that you'd give to parents to try and encourage this kind of that kind of position or that kind of view on what you're seeing?
Yeah, so we know that food behaviours and likes and dislikes, they're very personal and they're very innate as well. And for children, I suppose they're hardwired in a way to prefer calorie-dense, sweet foods, but there's a lot of potential to kind of shape and influence children in terms of, healthier choices and healthier foods as well. So research showing us that, really working with children and trying to introduce healthier choices from a very early age is actually a great way to develop very healthy eating habits for the remainder of their life. So as young as the age of, and even before too, to be offering a wide variety of kind of fruits and vegetables and lean protein sources and things like that, to kind of shape their behaviours going forward. From a more practical kind of point as well, children will look to parents to regulate their eating behaviour, and that is a key role. So I suppose leading by example and obviously trying to have as healthy a diet as we can ourselves to kind of model these kind of behaviours for our children in the home is really important. involving children in meal preparation and meal planning and things like that, as daunting as that might seem, is really, really beneficial in terms of, and it encourages them to be involved in the process, and it has been shown to be in a really positive way of helping them kind of choose healthier alternatives. Other things like having the focus of the meal to be like a social thing, rather than all of the emphasis being on the types of foods that we're eating and things like that. So that it's a very social event, and although everybody's schedules are crazy today, but when the family can get together and sit around and talk about their days, and just it being a social thing, has been shown again to be really positive for children's eating behaviour as well. From a practical point of picky eating and things like that, or where there's behaviours that we feel need to be changed, the advice would be to try and tackle one issue at a time, and not try and go in and overcorrect everything all in one go, kind of like a 1st of January approach where you're trying to change everything. That's been shown to be not very lasting in terms of, but to look at things like perhaps trying to introduce more vegetables, and then being persistent with that as well, because it mightn't be met very favourably at the start, and then later down the road try and reduce treats and things like that. So just take it one topic at a time and be consistent is really important as well. And then I think another really important thing as well is, if weight is a concern, to really frame the conversation around being healthy rather than focus on losing weight or trying to reduce weight. So being really conscious of the words that we're using with our children as well, and to, for example, say things like, we won't have treats today because we're trying to be healthy and we're trying to be strong, or vice versa, we're going to have this today which will make us really strong and healthy. And as well, there's fantastic resources out there. I've mentioned Safe Food before. They have a great campaign that's in existence called the START campaign, and that's really small ways in which we can think about making our children's diets healthier, whether that be portion size, whether that be reducing treats and things like that. The Irish Nutrition Dietetic Institute, the INDI, they have fantastic resources as well as mychild.ie from the HSE. So there's great resources and help out there for parents to make those changes.
It's great. Yeah, it sounds like great advice. Although I tried to include our 3 kids in food preparation once, and I haven't recovered since.
Yeah.
But,
It can be challenging. I'm not saying it's easy.
Michael, would you echo those sentiments then?
My advice is never to eat anything that's been made by a child. I think that's very comprehensive. I'm the one I'm fond of is the 5 a day. It's made such a difference to diets. It's really important. It's easy to get children into. Just things like understanding portion size. The other thing that I think is really good is the work that some of the sports organisations are doing, and both in terms of schools, but also just in terms of clubs and stuff like that, where clearly there's been a huge focus on giving really good healthy eating advice to young sports people, and I think there's huge resources within those sort of environments which could be very positive as well. So there's lots and lots of good advice out there. My favourite one is the UK, the Hypnotist. There's a book, Paul McKenna, yes. The I Can Make You Thin. Taste your food and chew your food. It's sort of like, it's so basic, really grandmother simple advice, but actually it's a fundamental for a lot of kids. And adults as well. We all just inhale our food because we're so busy. We're in such a rush, and so I think there's some really simple stuff that you can, if you got that into your child, building habits, just building good habits. 5 a day, taste and chew your food, plenty of activity, being sensible and looking for good food, knowing what good food looks like, which is not always easy. And I think we haven't really touched on it, but I think it's also one of the biggest challenges, this concept that a healthy diet's not necessarily a cheap diet. And actually a cheap diet can be very nutritionally packed, so you can get your energy cheaply, but it's not good energy. And then also the concept that there's an awful lot of kids that we're meeting now who are in the situation of dreadful situations. You know, if you imagine children living in multi-occupancy accommodation in relation to emergency accommodation, stuff like that, where there is no prospect of being able to prepare their own food or to, you know, those sort of things, and those situations challenging diets as well. So there's lots of things where, you know, where options become limited, not because of because of finance or because of the situation. So I think that they're worth thinking about as well.
Yeah, those are worrying situations. But I think there's been a lot of positives from our conversation today. Is there anything else that you'd like to see happen, or one particular thing that you would advocate for changing and improving? What would that be, Claire?
Yeah, so I've talked obviously a lot about the surveys that we do here, and they're excellent, very detailed, but there's a slight issue in that they're only conducted every 8 to 10 years, so that leaves large gaps in the data that we're collecting, whereas in the UK they collect data on a rolling basis, on a yearly basis. They're cross-sectional surveys that are, you know, done on a yearly basis, so they're able to really see emerging trends very quickly, and that's something where we're kind of lacking a little bit. So I think, you know, to a bit more frequent data collection there. They're expensive surveys to conduct, and they collect, as I said, a lot of detailed information, so that's kind of why they aren't done as often as they are. But I think, yeah, a little bit more detailed information there through on a more regular basis would be great. Another really important thing is access to dietitians, particularly in a community setting as well. I think we've kind of talked about this before, you know, having access to a dietitian. There are a few kind of community-based dietitians. They're few and far between and very difficult to get access to, but having access to them at a primary care / kind of community level is enormous. So, you know, trying to increase the numbers there, albeit challenging as it is in the current climate, I think would be really beneficial for families. And then lastly, the HSE have some really nice initiatives in the community again. And I say community because we're thinking of Sláinte Care and a lot of these kind of initiatives being community-based and services being community-based. They have a programme called Healthy Food Made Easy. And this is community workers working with families and people's coming in, talking about, you know, cooking and recipes and you know, some nutritional information there as well. So that's an example of a really nice initiative, but I think there could be plenty more, and some perhaps targeting families specifically. I think initiatives like that would be great to see going forward.
Great, yeah. And Michael, how about you? What would you like to see happen?
I think Claire's really spoken very well about the sort of the need for the community supports and really that sort of preventative role of education. You mentioned the safe food, which I think is doing a really good job in schools and sort of getting that message out to the community as well. So be very supportive of that sort of work. I suppose at a slightly more selfishly medically focused level, I think it's really important that people who are at the very extreme ends of nutritional problems, so either the eating disorder end of nutritional problems or the true childhood obesity end of nutritional problems, are able to access specialist services. And whilst there are specialist services at the eating disorder services are that there are very good services, they're not always easy to access. There's needs to be more support at that end available, and also I think there needs to be more support available at the obesity end, with a really trying to help children who are coping with the more severe end of obesity to understand that it's not their fault, that they are biologically in a situation where they may not be able to, they probably are not going to be able to fix this problem themselves because of the way all of our brains are wired. If you achieve a certain level of excess nutrition, your body is programmed to not let you lose it. And in order for you to get that weight down to a healthy lifelong weight, you are going to need services that involve psychology, that involve dietetics, that involve medical assessment for the complications of obesity, which can be severe, and that involve people who are able to potentially prescribe you medications which are probably coming along that will be a game changer in terms of treating obesity. And to be able to access further on other treatments that may be necessary as well. So it's really important that children at the sort of the very pointy end of these problems are really, really supported with expert services. We're doing probably okay, but could do better with at the eating disorder end. I think we're only really beginning to start to address the challenge at the obesity end. So I think that's a really important thing that we could, as a takeaway, to grow on and to get better if it's possible.
Thanks very much for those really useful take-home messages. That concludes our discussion today, and my sincere thanks to our speakers, Dr. Claire Timon and Dr. Michael Riordan. Further details about upcoming episodes in the MyHealth series can be found on the RCSI website. You can also find the RCSI MyHealth Series episodes across all major podcast platforms. And RCSI is committed to improving human health, and we are proud to be ranked the first in the world for our impact on good health and well-being. Thanks again to our partners, Fleming Medical, an Irish-owned family business with 35 years experience working in pharmacy and healthcare professionals, and we are delighted to have their support for this year's MyHealth series. From all of us here at RCSI University of Medicine and Health Sciences, thank you for joining us.